Welcome to the Sound of Resistance. Russia's war in Ukraine continues to get complicated for the Russian military. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to advance, while the Russian troops are deeply worried about fighting. The most serious formations of the war are currently concentrated in the Kharkiv and Kherson region. The Ukrainian army, passing like a whirlwind over the Russian army in Kharkiv, forced them to flee in the area. In Kherson, on the other hand, the process of the Ukrainian armed forces is progressing much more steadily. The armed forces of Ukraine is not in a hurry due to the density of the civilian structures. Despite this, the Ukrainian armed forces is getting closer to seizing the region with each passing day. This means that there is little time left to unlock Crimea. The Russian army continues to unleash new disgraces in Crimea as well. There was a great atmosphere of panic in the Russian troops in the region after the attacks on Crimea at the beginning of September. It is reported by the sources here that Putin warned the commanders in Crimea with a very harsh language. However, this state of panic makes them make too many mistakes. According to recent reports, a Russian military plane crashed for the second time in occupied Crimea in 2 days. Single-seat armored attack aircraft Su-25 crashed in occupied Crimea. This aircraft became the second aircraft destroyed in the peninsula in the last 2 days. It is reported that a Su-34 fighter plane crashed in the region the day before. First, let's talk about the downfall of the Su-25. It is known that the Su-25 has lost control during takeoff. You can see how the plane soars into the sky in the images released. Smoke appears near the Su-25 later. The aircraft then unsuccessfully dives and crashes to the ground. Journalists emphasize that the pilot did not have time to launch. At the same time, information emerged that the Su-25 may have been shot down by an air defense system located in the Crimea. This could mean a disaster scenario for Russia, because recently the Russian army has shot down its own guns many times and destroyed its headquarters and bridges. At the same time, as we just mentioned, a Russian Su-34 fighter jet crashed near Krasnoperekopsk in occupied Crimea. The plane crash occurred on the border of Krasnoperekopsky district. Eyewitnesses reported that the incident took place in the morning and the plane crashed into a field. According to unconfirmed information, the pilots of the military plane jumped out. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, as usual, did not officially comment on the accident itself or the fate of the pilots. Information emerged that the Russian plane may have been shot down by an air defense system in Crimea. In addition, eyewitnesses shared the information that the plane crash caused a large fire. Prior to this, a military transport plane, Tu-76, crashed in the Ryazan region of the Russian Federation. As a result of the disaster, 4 crew members died. The rest were taken to doctors with various wounds and injuries. Look, the possibility that the air defense systems in Crimea may be the culprit is seriously emphasized in the downfall of 2 warplanes. After the attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces, the inadequacy of the air defense systems in the Crimea was discussed. As a result, it was rumored that the Russian army had deployed air defense systems in the region. But we have seen many times that these do not work very well. Especially these last 2 events completely destroyed the trust in the air force in Crimea. The Russian army, on the other hand, started to use spare parts removed from the planes and helicopters in order to evaluate the wreckage of the planes. Russian carriers began issuing spare parts from helicopters to repair other machines with their help due to the shortage of parts and the increase in the cost of components. It is noteworthy that this situation develops not only in foreign helicopters but also in domestic helicopters. It turned out that after the start of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, almost all high-tech Russian goods are completely not produced in the country. Helicopters are no exception. These helicopters are equipped with blocks of foreign equipment. For example, the helicopter manufacturer Ansat from Kazan faced difficulties. These machines have engines made in the USA and Canada and starter generators from the USA and the Czech Republic. In other words, all of these developments actually came about as a result of sanctions from the West. Yuri Kazakov, director of Russian helicopter systems, stated that in the near future there will be more problems with starting generators because parts fail and cannot be replaced. According to the latest conclusions, there are hundreds of such helicopters in Russia and there is no way to repair them. This may cause the Russian army to fall further behind in infantry warfare. Finally, the sanctions also affected the Russian Mi-80s. The Russian Federation tries to find components for them from friendly states. However, spare parts prices have increased drastically. Delivery times also leave much to be desired. While the Russian army is struggling with these difficulties, the Ukrainian armed forces is increasing its pressure and showing that it deserves the support from the West. Earlier this summer, it became common knowledge that Russia was going to crush the Ukrainian army in a war of attrition. Yes, he had defeated the first Russian lightning strike in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, but Ukraine was still outnumbered and unarmed. Donbas artillery would break through the Ukrainian units as Russia focused its efforts on one area. Russia would gradually gain ground. Over time, Ukraine's position would become untenable. However, none of this happened. This position showed that Western support for Ukraine was thus prolonging the inevitable. To some, if Ukraine failed to win, it made sense to make concessions to end its destabilizing effects on the region and the suffering of the Ukrainian people. These variations were shared by realists who asserted the reality of Russia's invincible power and the risk of escalation, and limiters who saw the United States drawn into other post-Cold War conflict, this time with nuclear power. This position has suffered a significant setback with Ukraine's recent and fast-paced battlefield success. The idea that Ukraine cannot win is no longer valid. It is now quite clear that the Ukrainian leadership, national commitment, and tactical prowess prevailed over the Russians. The Russian summer successes, which motivated much of his earlier pessimism, used enormous resources, including high-quality units and large quantities of artillery shells, to make minimal progress. The Ukrainians did indeed give ground, but it is now clear that this was a regular retreat designed to exhaust the Russians and weaken them against subsequent Ukrainian offensive actions. The anti-Ukrainian attitude in the West now faces a dilemma. Intellectually honest voices must admit that the previous advice that Ukraine's defeat is inevitable and that surrender is therefore the most humane, least destabilizing outcome is false. It is not clear whether Ukraine will win this year for sure. Excessive enthusiasm is unnecessary. Increasingly, however, it looks like Ukraine will be able to repulse most Russian forces by the end of 2023. Putin is now gambling that power cuts in Europe and the cold winter or uncertain nuclear threat will cause the West to cut off military support to Ukraine, which will be thwarted. However, if he fails in this regard, he may face complete destruction. Finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced partial mobilization in Russia, and the war in Ukraine threatened the West as the war in Ukraine neared the end of 7 months. Putin's address to the nation comes a day after the announced plans to vote on Russian-controlled areas in eastern and southern Ukraine to become integral parts of Russia. Kremlin-backed efforts to engulf the 4 regions could set the stage for Moscow to escalate the war after Ukraine's recent successes on the battlefield. Referendums will begin on Friday in Luhansk, Kherson, and the partially Russian-controlled Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. Putin also said in his speech that the West is blackmailing Russia, but that his country has many weapons to counter. We will use all the resources we have to defend our people, news agencies reported. And he told the West, if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will use all the means at our disposal to defend Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.